Hello, Dave Hurwitz at ClassicsToday.com here to talk to you about the most recommendable recordings of Bruckner's Symphony Number 5. Now, as we all know, this one's going to be a toughie because everyone will have their favorite performances, and the Bruckner Fifth is the most Brucknerian of all the Bruckner symphonies. In other words, it's the one that sounds most like Bruckner and least like anybody else you can imagine. I think it's possibly the strangest and also one of the very greatest symphonies of the entire 19th century. It's unique in every way imaginable, not the least of which is the fact that it is the finale symphony par excellence, because all three of the preceding movements are essentially introductory. And they're essentially introductory, but they last something like 50 minutes combined. So that's an awful lot of introduction before you get to a finale. So when you get to that finale, it really better deliver the goods. And a performance that's successful has to bear in mind, as Eugen Yocum even said, that nothing happens until the very end when the chorale comes roaring in the brass. So in the meantime, the conductor's job is to keep us interested until we get there. Not that there isn't lots of stuff to be interested in. The symphony is fascinating. Its cyclical processes, its formal aspect, its scoring. I mean, the very introduction with that pizzicato plodding bass and the soft string chorale and then the huge arpeggios and brass chorales, punctuated by silence. There's absolutely nothing like it in the entire history of music. Nothing. No symphony ever began like that, and no symphony ends like it either. So, what are the best performances? Broadly speaking, there are two general interpretive issues that conductors need to solve. The first is what to do at the very end when the coda comes in with the chorale and all of that stuff starts happening. Do you slam on the brakes and broaden the tempo, or do you do what the score indicated and just maintain the tempo and keep going at the same pace? There have been successful performances either way. Most conductors broaden the tempo a little. Some, like Yocum, practically cut the tempo in half. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. In Yocum's own recordings, it works with the Staatskapelle Dresden. It doesn't work so well in his earlier Deutsche Grammophon recording. It has to do really with how much momentum is accumulated and how much you're willing to jam on the brakes and stop the momentum when that coda comes in. Of course, some concept of pulse and energy should carry right through it, so the tempo relationships have to be very carefully judged. The same issue, that of tempo relationships, applies to the two inner movements, because as you know, the scherzo begins with the same motive as the adagio. Now the adagio is in cut time, and that motive is in quarter note triplets. Dum, bum, 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 etc. The scherzo has 3 quarter notes to a bar. It's in 3/4, so it's dum, bum, 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 like that. Some conductors believe that there should be a strict proportional relationship between the tempo of the adagio and the tempo of the scherzo. And in order to make that happen so that the scherzo doesn't drag unconscionably, they tend to speed up the adagio. And that can make the adagio sound, quite frankly, I think, very, very overly hasty, unless it's played very, very carefully. Some conductors have even made the adagio and the scherzo effectively the same tempo as regards the pace of that motive that they share. And that can be really, really difficult. On the other hand, if you stretch the adagio out to 20 minutes, as Schulte does, Karajan does, that might be too slow. That might just be too slow. Even though you can still hear the identity of the motive that they share, it does tend to drag. And unless the movement is really superbly sustained by the players, I think it can become a little bit monotonous. So, with those issues out there, let us talk about the performances that I feel, one way or another, all solve them. The first, which is, of course, the one I keep right here on my iPhone, is Nikolaus Harnoncourt with the Vienna Philharmonic. Now, he's one of the sort of new style Bruckner guys. He plays the movements, generally speaking, pretty swiftly, although the first movement is a moderate tempo. And he tends to try to equalize the adagio and the scherzo, but he does it in a way which is sensitive enough to the character of the adagio that for me, it works. And the finale is fabulous. He's got the Vienna Philharmonic playing absolutely wonderfully, and the whole thing holds together very, very well. The real sleeper performance, in my view, is Eugene Ormandy in the Philadelphia Orchestra. Now, Ormandy was really a very fine Brucknerian. His Fourth Symphony is excellent, and so is his Seventh. But this is really a remarkable performance in many, many ways. You know, Ormandy is often characterized as somebody who cared only for string tone and ignored everybody else. But that's not true. It's absolutely not true. The facts are not borne out by the audible results of the recordings that he left us. The Philadelphia Orchestra, under his watch, had magnificent woodwinds and a fantastic brass section that was full of its own unique character. And it happens to be very good for Bruckner because the brass section is well differentiated in timbre. It's not like, for example, Karajan's Berlin Philharmonic, where when the chorale comes in, you hear sort of this glutinous brass globule with the horns and the trumpets and the trombones all kind of congealing. In the Philadelphia Orchestra, they all stand out in their specific strands, which gives the music a lot of more personality and also allows Bruckner's polyphony to register quite clearly. Nor does he stint on the woodwinds. And the Fifth Symphony, of course, is hardly the kind of symphony. I mean, this isn't Tchaikovsky we're talking about. It's not the kind of thing where having a sumptuous string tone is going to get you very far, except in a couple places, perhaps in the adagio, which are quite beautiful. But Ormandy's pacing of the symphony is just about ideal. He doesn't slow down too much in the chorale at the very end. The adagio is somewhere around 15, 16 minutes. You know, it's just smartly done all the way through. And you're not really even conscious of tempo happening. The music simply flows along doing what it does, and it works really, really well. It's a fine performance of the Fifth, understanding and sympathetic, and not at all what the prejudice against Ormandy would lead you to believe. Now, I already mentioned this one. This is Eugen Yocum with the Staatskapelle Dresden. This is his best version of the Bruckner 5. Now, I know some people have an affinity for that live performance he did with the Concertgebouw in, I forget which abbey it is. Somebody will undoubtedly post it. I've got the recording sitting in my shelf over there. I find that to be a rather dull and flabby performance that's a bit defeated by the acoustic. But this one gets it right in just about all particulars, and especially at the very end where he does stop the music dead in its tracks for the chorale, but he doesn't really stop it dead in its tracks. You actually feel a pulse that keeps going. I mean, that's an exaggeration I'm making for the sake of the point. It really does work. Yocum, of course, used an extra brass section, at least for the beginning of the coda, to give the guys playing the chorale a bit of a rest before they had to come back in. And it works. It works in this performance, and there's no reason to think that Yocum wasn't completely confident and comfortable with the results he got this time around. Now, the next, I think, absolutely terrific performance is Scovo Chesky, who, as we all know, was an absolutely spectacular Bruckner conductor. He actually brings his own slant to the very end of the symphony. You may not know this, but there's a flute arpeggio at the very, very end, just before the da-dum, bum-ba-da-dum, bum-ba-da, that business. And he actually lets you hear it. He does it by making everyone else execute a huge diminuendo, but there is a part there that you thought you would never hear, and you do. Actually, in that finale, under the chorale, there is also a completely independent bassoon part, which never in a million years are you ever going to hear, because everyone else is going crazy and you can't do anything about it. But the reason there's a completely independent bassoon part is because all of the accompaniment is the accompanying parts are executing a canon on the motive bump, bump, bump-ba-dum, bump, right? And it's happening at a bar at one beat's distance for each entry. And there's nothing on the third beat. Bruckner needed to stick something there, or the fourth beat, maybe, one of them. So he uses the bassoons. And, it's a wonderful example, first of all, of how obsessive compulsive he was, but also, the theory that Tovey once said, that the Greek artists painted the backs of the statues in the temples of the gods because the gods see everywhere. It had to be complete because God saw everything. And so it is. It is. And I pity the bassoonists. I really do. But their part is an independent one. By the way, did anyone ever tell you that tune, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, is very, very similar to the theme of the Flintstones? Flintstones, meet the Flintstones. They're the modern Stone Age family. I mean, it's absolutely the fugue theme for the finale of Bruckner's Fifth. I have no idea if the guy who wrote the Flintstones theme song knew that. All right, moving right along. The next really great recording is Claudia Labatto's. And this one surprised me because I have a problem with a lot of late Labatto. He was very fussy and I think became sort of a micromanager and ruined a lot of what he was trying to do. But also, as a Brucknerian, he was very on again, off again. Here with the Vienna Philharmonic again, he is on, and he's on in a way that's enormously exciting. He doesn't slow down at all for the chorale. He just barrels right through, and they play like crazy, and it sounds fabulous. And you actually often also hear a little bit of that flute arpeggio that Scovo Chesky brings out without him having to make such a diminuendo. I don't know how they did it, whether it was the engineers or what, but it's quite a fine performance. Next up, Günter Wand, always a sympathetic Brucknerian. This is his best version with the NDR Symphony Orchestra. Now, the problem with Wand's performances in general, for some reason, the one at least historically, is that he was working with orchestras that didn't necessarily have the chops to get through the whole symphony. At the end, they kind of conk out. His first recording from Cologne has that issue. The brass section doesn't have the energy to sustain the music all the way to the end. Here they basically manage it. And, that's critical. If the brass don't hold up through the end of the finale, then the whole symphony goes for nothing. So, but this is an incredibly sympathetic performance. And as usual with Wand, it's full of unbelievably well-judged details of balance, of brass chording and the strings to winds to timpani. It's really quite beautiful, and it never sounds forced or harsh, and it also never sounds underplayed because the clarity is such that the lines of the contrapuntal lines are always clear. There's always something to listen to, especially in that central fugue in the finale. It's pretty splendid. Now, two of my favorite ones. We're getting down to like the two favorites. This one may also come as something of a surprise. Dochnani and the Cleveland Orchestra. This is a really, really exciting and beautifully played performance. The orchestra is in tip-top form here. It really is. And, I hate to say it because Dochnani was very sensitive about this subject, but if there were a Zell recording of this symphony, this is how I think it would sound, because it has that kind of the rhythmic discipline. The tension is there all the time. And at the very end, when you have the head motive of the fugue played in the trombones and the way they just cut through the texture, again, without ever forcing, just by balance and weight of sonority, is really special. It's a beautiful performance, immaculately well judged all the way through. All the tempi makes sense. And I really think it's very beautiful. But we now come to what I think is my sort of reference recording and my favorite of all the recordings of Bruckner's Fifth. And it's been such a favorite for so long. I have such a warm feeling for it. Wolfgang Sawallisch with the Bavarian State Orchestra on Orfeo. It's another one of those performances that goes as if self-propelled. Sawallisch, was a Kapellmeister. Let's face it, he had his moments, but he could also be extremely prosaic. His tenure in Philadelphia wasn't terribly successful because he just wasn't a magnetic personality by and large. But everyone has their hot days, and this was one of his. This is a recording where, first of all, the balance is, the sound is close to a live performance. It's a natural sounding orchestra in a large warm room. And so the climaxes fill the space effortlessly. it's also wonderfully paced. His handling of the accelerandi in the scherzo, Bruckner very seldom writes tempos to accelerate or, slow down or whatnot. But in the scherzo, of course, there are two basic tempos, and you have to get from one to the next. And he does it so well, and the result is so exciting and so rhythmically vital. And in the finale, again, he gets all of the tempo relationships in perfect balance. And when the final chorale comes in, and he does relax for it, he keeps the energy moving all the way through. Why? Because the trombones and the instruments that have the rhythm are super, super well defined. You always hear it's like a giant cosmic engine pushing its way through to the end of the symphony. And the result is just incredibly compelling. So that's my view of Bruckner's Fifth Symphony. I know many of you will also have your own favorite recordings or mention some of the ones that I've omitted. And as always, I know that there are others. I like the first Haitink. I like the Vienna Haitink. I like, it's a symphony that, for all its oddness, has done very well. There are some strange performances too. There's the Yarvi, which gets through it in something like, 55 minutes. It's unbelievably fast and in some ways kind of interesting. Then there's the horrible Fanzago recording on CPO with a chamber orchestra. A chamber orchestra in Bruckner's Fifth. It's a joke and a farce and something to be avoided like death. But I think that I would rather focus on the positive and celebrate the fact that this incredibly unique and intriguing and emotionally exalting symphony has found so many committed interpreters doing their best work. So again, for my money, Sawallisch on Orfeo, but any of the ones that I've listed will do you proud. So keep on listening, folks, and thank you.